Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for having me today. My name's Jason Sherwood, and this is my second day here, and I'm very pleased to see you all again. I run a team of solution architects at Equinix, and they're working with companies within the media industry day by day, trying to create solutions for those corporations of how they manage the digital workflow. And I wanted to share some of those stories with everybody here today about the kind of things that we're seeing within the marketplace. If we think about all the presentations that I've seen today, flexibility and the rate of change has become a key theme. Things are changing constantly within the industry. Different ways of doing workflow. And if you think about the disruptive active of the cloud coming into the equation, how do you deal with that point, that indecision, that change, in terms of creating a flexible architecture? And that's really what I want to talk about today, is how do you create those flexibility points when you're bringing all these things together? Otherwise, we end up like these guys. You need to be able to change with the times as you go through this disruption as we move forward. And the other thing is, no enterprise is an island. None of us, if we think about all the solutions we've talked about today, they could well all be talking to each other. They're all part of potentially a digital workflow. So you can't just think of yourself as one insular system. You really have to think of that interconnection of the various component parts. How does it all work together? How does this piece work with that piece, work to another piece? How does something in the Google Cloud then work with something with Amazon, something with on-premise, and bringing all these pieces in together? And if I think, something odd went there, sorry. Go back one. If I think about this, what we like to think about is you've got this edge of an enterprise. So let's say you're using one of the clouds, let's say. There's a point where you leave that cloud and go to something else, whether that's an end user, whether that's to another part of the digital workflow. No matter where you are with any of the solutions we talked about, there's always an edge. And the question is, how do you create that digital edge to connect from me here to the person on the other side? How do I connect to my partner on this other side? How do I decrease the chasm that's shown on this picture without, flying on a piece of wire as shown here? How do I create something a bit more robust and something a little bit more comforting than a little piece of string connecting from my edge to someone else's edge, so I can create security, speed, and reliability? How do I bring these two edges together? And that's really the key thing that I'll be talking about. And the way we've kind of brought this into more in terms of the media industry, you have all these edges, whether it's between the various parts of the production workflow, between cloud and premises, between the real world outside and the virtual world. How do you create the edge so you have these flexibility points? So that one point I can be sending data there, to there, to there, and create the flexible solution that I need to be able to do things quickly to get the end result out at the end of the digital workflow. And what I'm going to do is kind of talk through the workflow. This is kind of a very basic version of a workflow. And I'm going to break it down into three sections around creation, management, and then delivery. And we can talk through those and some of the trends we've seen there and some of the key connection points that we see that we need to create that flexibility and where we need to create that edge. So if I think about bringing content in, obviously the key thing is in just there. How do I bring content in at the very front end? And really key to that is access to networks, is bringing stuff in from the networks. Whether that happens to be a private network, the public internet, the mobile networks, you need to make sure that you can create that edge where you can bring content in from various different ingest stories into the digital workflow. And then once you have it in, how do you store it? And this is kind of well positioned, this deck straight after the HDSD presentation, because we have the physical storage, the storage in the cloud. There's an edge there, and that's a real obvious one, and it was on the slide a few minutes ago. Obviously, if you've got a bunch of storage on site, and you're also bursting in the cloud or maybe archiving into the cloud, there's an edge there, and how do you create the right kind of performance within that digital edge between my environment, let's say an on-premise environment, and the cloud? And also, if you're trying to do storage locally of yourself, you need to create storage islands, let's say, wherever you need them to be. It's not just going to be in LA, it could potentially be all over the country, all over the world. You need those various points available around the world to be able to deliver that. And then if we look at the meat of it, the content management, the content creation piece in the middle, there's really three key points I want to highlight here. The access to the application is key from an end user perspective. That's whether that application is in the data center or whether it's in the cloud. These people are doing professional work, and they need that application to work in an extremely available and good way to be able to deliver the output they need in a time-effective manner. Then you need access to the data that we've just been recently talking about. In terms of the data center or in the cloud, you need to have that available to you. And also access to be able to work with partners. And really the key drivers under each of this, like I said, for the applications, we need to be able to deliver that user experience. The person needs to be able to access something that's maybe in the cloud, just the same as they'd be accessing something that's right in front of them on their desktop under the table, so to speak, or on the laptop. You need to have that similar kind of performance, otherwise it just doesn't work in terms of pushing stuff to the cloud or creating different types of service solutions for your customers. Access to data, as well as user experience, they're securing that, and we've talked again about security earlier on today, and the sheer volume, as was just mentioned, the terabytes of data, the extremely large amounts of volume. How do you get access to an end user that needs that in a speedy, effective fashion, and how do you create that edge? And then access to partners. And the really key thing I want to add there is kind of the velocity of the interaction. How can I quickly interact through a whole bunch of different people, whether I'm moving between clouds or moving between different partners that I work with? How can I create that velocity so we look like a single enterprise? And if you look at what folks have been doing within Equinix here, one of the key ones I wanted to kind of put out in the application space, you're seeing more and more folks moving to SaaS. So the SaaS video editing solution that we've been working with a client of ours. And that's a really interesting one because you're talking about lots of edges there. You're talking about an end user, and then you're talking about a SaaS application. But that SaaS application is running on Microsoft Azure in the cloud. So you've really got 3 tiers of that architecture. And how do you make sure it all works well as a single stack? And then finally, when we look at content delivery, you got to have that, how do you access those end users? Whether that's out through traditional networks, say private networks, public networks, through peering relationships to the internet, whether that's through traditional or new waves of CDNs, whether that's through the cloud. A lot of content delivery now done through the cloud, as experienced in Netflix, or a case study that everybody talks about using AWS as a key delivery infrastructure. And then the localization of data. How do you get that close to the end user that needs it, whether it's in the data center or in the cloud? Access to my distribution partners, say whether that's traditional broadcast or whether that's all the new wave of broadcast relationships that are potentially there, and then access to the partners and ecosystems that I'm working with to deliver something. If I think about the access to end users, one of the clients we're working with is producing, is a sports broadcaster, not the one I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but a different sports broadcaster, and they're really interested in focusing on multi-channel environment. So it's not just about producing, one physical stream going out to one particular playout partner. We're talking about multi-channel, maybe mobile, maybe internet, maybe say traditional broadcast. But to be able to do multi-channel, you need access to all those channels, and you need to be able to push access to those channels in a very efficient manner and create that edge piece there. We're working with another large organization, which you're hearing probably more about over the next few weeks, around the localization of data. In that case, they have a cloud DVR solution. Where are you going to put the data? Where do you store that? You need to put that next to the customers. So therefore, creating these positions where you can keep data local to those clients so they can easily pull that data, stream it to their TV set from that cloud DVR. And then the partner and ecosystem play comes very important when you start talking about, if I talked about multi-channel earlier on, if you're talking about ad insertion, things like that, Brightroll have been working with us for years around their AdIX and ad bidding environment. But if you think about it, this gets even more complex with all these different channels. How do I add the right piece of advertising and bringing these various other partner ecosystems into that workflow? How do I create that edge so I can get that in real time out to an end user? And we've kind of boiled this together in this architecture here, where on the left-hand side there you have the digital asset increase that's coming in from the networks, coming in from the mobile networks, wherever it come in from. Then you've got the work. Then you've got the VFX and all the various other stuff we've been talking about today, the work happening in the center there. And we talk about folks actually, standing up these applications and keeping the data at rest within the data center, and then people working on that data within our media ecosystem within the data center. And obviously on the edge of that very important piece is potential storage within the data center, but also access to those clouds. And we're talking that, and this is probably the most important kind of digital edge that we're really talking about today, is the access to those clouds. How do I get access to all the various speakers today that are coming in to talk about their cloud architectures? How do I break down that barrier between the cloud and any other piece of the ecosystem that I'm working on? How do I create those edges to the cloud? And the other key thing that we're seeing more and more is this kind of hybrid environment whereby It's not just all public or all private. You've got much more a hybrid workflow. My colleague from Google mentioned that this morning. And also multi-cloud, where you're using the right cloud for the right piece. It's not just about, hey, I'm going to go all in on cloud X, whatever that might be. There's a lot of folks using the different clouds depending on what kind of application they're trying to do. Maybe they're doing storage one place. Maybe they're doing a specific, we talked a lot about VFX in the cloud earlier, doing that with the Google cloud that we mentioned. But maybe they're also doing other pieces of the workflow elsewhere in different clouds. And how do you create that edge so that they can all work together in an efficient manner? And that's a very important part of the factor to play as well. And then finally, obviously, the distribution out to the CDNs, the WAN, the internet, out to the end users such as myself, consuming media. And one of the examples that I like to bring up, which really looks at this whole end-to-end workflow that we've seen, was ATM Sports, where they have live content coming in from various cameras. This is in the UK. So live content coming in. They're creating highlight reels, so they get the content coming into one of our buildings in London. They're then working on that remotely. Their editors, etc., are working on that content, packaging it up into those highlight reels. They have that burstability to the cloud as they need that, because the clouds are also there in that particular location. And then they cross-connect over to playout partners and the traditional playout partners to send content out to end users. And they have a very quick turnaround here. I think it's like 3 hours, where they have to get this kind of in and out. So we're very, very, almost not quite live, but they really are working in real time to get data out to end users in this multi-channel on the right-hand side. So here you're kind of seeing the whole picture in its entirety from start to finish. And the reason I kind of get to talk about this, and the reason we see a lot of this stuff when we're talking to our customers, is we have a lot of folks within our data centers doing this kind of thing. We have the clouds there. We have all the big clouds we're talking about. We have the content and digital media industry, including especially the CDNs. That's the key important, obviously, in terms of that distribution piece. And we have access to those networks. Those networks are there within our locations, whether that be mobile, whether that be fixed, whether that be going through some sort of internet exchange and peering, or whether that's going to traditional broadcast platform with potentially satellites on the roof. And what's interesting, this is a little animation of the LA market, and you can see over the last 7 years now the way kind of connections have grown within a particular location. So you can see more and more connections. This kind of illustrates people throwing a cable across a floor almost. You're seeing gradually more and more folks connect themselves together within the data center. So you're seeing a constant growth of the digital media industry, obviously always been consuming network, consuming more and more network, but also you're seeing that growth in terms of consuming cloud and connecting to the cloud platforms. And this is probably going to accelerate even more, particularly in LA, now that we have an AWS Direct Connect node sitting in our data center down the street in El Segundo. So we have that kind of connectivity there. So you're going to see even more of that growth between digital media and the cloud. And we previously, Google and Microsoft were there previously as well. And then connecting with our partners, an ecosystem is only as good as the people in it. And the big thing that we've got on my team has clearly got a priority to go out there is just bring more people into the club, because the more people are in the club, the more useful the club is, the more useful you can talk to each other and create this kind of simple, low latency, highly secure connection across a cable with anybody that happens to be in your ecosystem, not just the kind of traditional ones I'm talking about, but anybody kind of on these slides. How do we bring as many people into the same place as we can so that they can all work together on producing creative output? The last thing I just wanted to mention is one thing we've done with our architect team. We've gone out and talked to a lot of people about how they've done this kind of thing, how they've done transitions to cloud, how they've designed their workflows, how they've transformed their business. And we've put this all up on the web, and I'll stick the URLs, very small print down there, will come up bigger in a second, where we've built this. We've gone out there, talked to folks, seen what they've done, and kind of generalized it into, maybe you're trying to do specific things in the network, maybe around security, maybe it's around data and where you place data, maybe it's around applications. But we've created this website, which isn't really, Equinix branded. It's really just there as a bunch of knowledge, and we're trying to make it more collaborative as we go forward, where you see blueprints for, this is a data blueprint, so you can pull down these papers, see what people are doing, see how you might architect things, and then drill down in, how do you do a specific something? How do we see people doing that? And we're trying to make this is kind of wave one that you're seeing here. We're going to gradually build and build in terms of making it more interactive as well, trying to make more of a community of interest in how people are using the infrastructure to get stuff done and deliver things on that kind of tube map that we showed there on that front page. And on that note, my whistle-stop tour, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And say the URL is up there, and you'll see that. And feel free to go on there and register for that site and use it to your heart's content.